Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Android Study Jams. This would be the last session we have planned for all of you, and I definitely hope all of you had a great day. Not going to forget my introduction this time. I'm Manab Kumar Biswas, and as I said, we're going to be talking through a couple of last concepts before we wrap up Android Study Jams for 2022. And right after my session, you would have a very interesting talk from very respected person. So I hope all of you are excited and all of that. But we're gonna be getting started with the session. All right. So I'm a little tight on time today. So what I can't do is I will not be able to answer your questions live as I did yesterday and day before. So, but you can still ask them in the chat, and I'll definitely make sure we answer all your questions in the Discord channel, the link that would be already sent to all of you. So please make sure you ask any questions at any point of time, as you did earlier, and I'll make sure they get answered. Right. So today we are going to be covering a lot of concepts. I'm not going to be showing you too many examples. I'm going to try to fit in examples whenever needed. But what we built in the last 2 days are Kotlin concepts as well as Android basics. So if you've listened to that, or if you listen to that after, say, today's sessions, that would give you a pretty good, hold on basics of how you look into Kotlin and how you would, look into Android Studio when you open up a project. So once you're familiar with both of them, what you would just need for this session is just to understand the concept. So when you go out through the course again by yourselves, the course by Google, you would find it fairly pretty easy to understand what's going on. And not only in the course, right? Say you pick up a code, set of lines of code from somewhere on the internet. So I assume it'd be pretty easy to understand once you've understood the concepts we covered in yesterday's and day before yesterday's sessions, right? So today we have Android Intermediates and Advanced. Gonna start with the learning objectives, and today we're gonna be crossing out the last one by the end of the session, right? So as I was talking about this yesterday, in the app that we built yesterday, you would have seen that we had only one activity. And an activity, again, is a screen that you see in your app, which has view groups or layouts, which has views within it. So most apps, as I discussed yesterday, would have multiple activities. So how you navigate between them is something called intents on a basic level. So what intents do is they help you navigate from one activity of your app to another. And you have two different types of intents, right? The one that I just mentioned was about um, the one that I just mentioned with explicit intents, because you define particular activities and you navigate between them, right? Whereas implicit intents are those, say, opening up links within your app, opening up callbacks of other app instances within your app, right? So as I mentioned yesterday, towards the end of the session, they're pretty important as well, because you would have to keep in mind those cases of where the user might not have the app that you presume they would have, right? So both of them are pretty important intents to be managed in your app. I'm gonna show you an app towards halfway of the session, which would cover all the concepts that I talked before that, right? So I would just request you to understand the concepts that we talked by. So intents are pretty basic, right? You can only navigate between activities, and you don't have much in terms of how you switch between activities. In the sense, you might want to have, you wouldn't call them gestures exactly, but you might want to have some kind of a different transition between two activities, right? So much, it is possible to do it, but it's pretty hard. So what Android gives us instead is something called Android Jetpack, which is a set of libraries, which I'll get to in a minute. Before that, as we said, that we have intents when we switch between different activities, right? So once your app has different activities, you talk about something called an activity lifecycle. So if you remember in the code that we saw yesterday, let me just pull that up real quick for a second. You would see that, give me a second, please. If you open up the main activity of any app, right, you would see an on create function, right, which I mentioned yesterday would be called only when you run the app for the first time, right? So this is an example of a function that helps you manipulate activity lifecycle. Just wanted to show that real quick. Now I'll actually guide you through what activity lifecycle exactly is. So when you have multiple activities, you will have life cycles for each activity, right? Because you can't keep them all running in the background if you think of it that way, because again, resources aren't that limited, but then depending on how you scale up your apps, they can get pretty tiresome for the processor to run. So here you would see a pretty common image that you would find in the internet for the activity lifecycle. As you have multiple activities, as I mentioned. So say you have an activity where which opens up when you click on your app icon, right? So whenever you open up your app, the first function that's called is on create, which I just showed you, which would be a part of any default code that you picked up while you open up a project, right? So when an on create function is called, is when your app is first open, and that's the only time it's called, right? Uh, then you have different phases. So you would see here the initialized after your app has been initialized. I mean, that's a way of saying, but once you've clicked on the app, the onCreate function is called, and then you can say that the app instance has been created. Not necessary that the activity needs to be visible at this point of time. So now that the app is instance is running in the background, when your app would be visible to you, like when the activity would be visible to you on the screen, the function that enables that is your on start or on restart, depending on whether you're opening your app from the background. Like it was running and you pushed it to the background and you opened it again. So at that point of time, on restart would be called, or else you would have on start. So let me not confuse you that way. So you're opening up an app for the first time. The first function that gets called is on create, and then you have an on start function. Then after the on start function is called, you see your activity on the screen, right? Uh, Now, say the activity is visible to you on the screen, but it's not necessary that you are interacting with it always, right? So, say you, but you would have to. I mean, of course, apps are meant for interacting with them. But say when you click on a button or when you click on any view present in the app, that's when you say your activity has focus, right? Because you're interacting with the activity, you're doing something with it, right? When you click a button, it's not that only the buttons being clicked, right? It gets propagated up through the life cycle. So that's when you say that your activity has focus, right? So that's when you have another function called onResume. Now, all these functions, if you saw in the class that I showed you in the beginning, it had an override keyword before the function, right? The onCreate function. So all these functions are, you can override them based on how you use them. So when you go through the Google course, you would see that to show you which function is called when. A very nice way of doing it would be, overriding all these functions and writing log messages. Now, I'm not going too deep into that because I don't have the time for that, but the ideal way to understand how these work would be, so say you have your class. As you had the override on create function, similarly, you do override fun on start. Then you open up your curly braces in a normal way, and then inside that you would do, say, log dot whatever, log dot I, log dot D, depends on what you want to do with it. And then you give a log message. You do that for all the functions that you see here. And then you run your app on the emulator or on your AVD is what it's called, and you would see that whenever you run the app, you would see a message from your log saying on create was called, depending on what log message you gave, right? So, and then when you interact with it, you would see your on start, on resume. When you push it to the background, you would see on pause, on stop, like that, right? So it's a pretty important part of how apps manage what's going on with your activity. And I recommend all of you doing that, provided that you've seen yesterday's session, you would know how to create logs. So you create logs for your overridden functions, and you can pretty much understand the structure. But as far as you should know, this should be what you're concerned about. So when you first run your app, you have an onCreate function that's called only once. Then you have your onStart function that gets called when your app activity is visible on the screen. Then when you interact with the app with the different views, you have your onResume. When you say leave your app open in the background, you would have onPause. You bring it back into bring it back into focus, you would have onRestart being called. And when you stop the app in the end, you would have onStop and onDestroy following by, and thereby you can say that activity lifecycle is complete, right? Okay, that pretty much covers activity lifecycle. Okay, now this is what I was talking about. So Android gives you a set of very useful and very extensible, as well as it provides you with a large set of tools in these libraries, which is, as you can see from the image, it's called Android Jetpack because Android has a jetpack on it. Yeah. So Android Jetpack, as you would see, is a set of libraries. And they give you, various useful tools. So you have something for navigation, you have something for data storage, you have something for connecting to the internet, various. I mean, those are just few nameful ones that are present in your course, but there's a large amount of tools that they provide to help you build your apps. Yeah, you also have something called, if I'm not wrong, it's called Kotlin for mobile. Let me just Google that up real quick. Kotlin mobile. If I'm not wrong, yeah, okay, Kotlin multi-mobile platform, right? KMMM is what it's called. So what this does is it gives you, not sure if this is the one. A second, please. Okay, I'm going to look this up. I don't remember the exact name for that, but it does give you a feature to write code in Kotlin and add up a couple of say functionalities from the libraries, and it lets you run your apps on other OS platforms as well, say on iOS, right? I don't remember what it's called exactly, but I'll get back with that at the end of the session. Okay, getting back to the content we need to cover. Right. So yeah, Jetpack is pretty useful. Along with the set of links I sent yesterday, I think I included the link for Android Jetpack, so you could see the various, the various tools they give you along with your library. So what we can be talking about here is Jetpack Navigation and how navigation using Jetpack is better than how you do it normally using intents. And also about Jetpack app architecture, which is a set of, I wouldn't say just rules, but it also, of course, a set of rules that provides you to, that helps you with structuring your data and your UI separately so that you don't, say, lose out on data when your UI has a problem, right? I mean, say you orient your device. So if you don't have proper views enabled, your data would be lost because if you see, and the screen would just get cut, right? Provided you've not provided proper view group. That is, if you've not used something called scroll view, right? So the first Jetpacks tool we can talk about is Jetpacks navigation component. If you remember in the first session, I was talking about how you have something also called fragments, which you can use within an activity, right? So the only way of navigating between different activities till now, what we knew was using intents, right? That you create an intent from one class and then you say that go ahead navigate to this class. That's how you would change your view, activity on the user screen to another one, provided you click a button or something of that sort. But what fragments are, they are a reusable piece of UI, I would say. So you can add multiple fragments within one activity. So I would show you an example of an app, right? So you would see in that you have only one main activity, but you have multiple fragment files. So what fragments are is they are a part of your UI that run within an activity. So you would have to swap multiple screens, right? Say you're running your YouTube app, right? So what you would do is you have your home icon in the bottom, you have search, you have suggestions, subscribers, I don't know what follows there. Then you have settings in the end, I presume. So all the swapping elements, all the swapping screens, they are in different activities, but they are different fragments. So you would see that you have something sort of this on bottom of most apps, what you call navigation bar. So once you click on these icons, they help you navigate between the different fragments in one activity. What this does is this helps you again save resources, because if you were to create multiple activities, swapping between them would take intent, and that's not efficient compared to what this is, because you're just running multiple fragments within one activity. It's not similar, but it's like you're running, say, you add multiple views to one activity, right? So how much resources would it take compared to you having multiple views and multiple what do you call activities, right? It's not the similar concept, but I'm trying to give you an analogy of what's happening here. So again, Jetpack provides you with a pretty easy navigation library, set of tools that help you easily navigate between different fragments. You wouldn't have to create intents here. So similar to an activity lifecycle, you have a fragment lifecycle. Now this again you would see similar callback functions that you can again override using the override keyword, where you would be able to again see how they come into life by writing log messages. Uh, so you would see that again, you have onCreate function that's being called when you first on your app. Then these two would be new functions here, because your fragment is basically like, as I mentioned, like you imagine it like creating a view within your activity, right? So in those terms, you can think of these functions. And then you again have your standard set of functions: on start, on resume, on pause, on stop. And then again, as you would have to first destroy an activity and then destroy, I'm sorry, the other way around. When you run fragments within an activity, right? So we first have to destroy the fragment and then destroy the activity when you close an app. So that's why you have your on destroy view first, which destroys your fragment, and then you have your on destroy, which destroys your entire activity. So that's a pretty basic overview of what fragments are and how they're a little better. I would say little, they're a lot more better than what activities. You can't compare them in that sense, but what I'm trying to tell you all is, the navigation part of it, how better they help you navigate between them, right? And now comes the Jetpack Navigation component. So this is again picked up from an app. So I would rather open that up. Right, I have the app running. So on the surface, you wouldn't see any difference. I think I did show this in the session yesterday. I'm not sure, but okay. So this is again picked up from your course by Google. Let me bring this up in the background so you can see a little easier. Yeah. So this is an app to order cupcakes. Now you have an option of 1, 6, or 12 cupcakes. So each of these buttons link to different fragments. This specific white portion that you see is a fragment within an activity, right? So these are again, in the same way that you have views in an activity, you have views in a fragment. This is again image view, your text view, your buttons, right? So when you click on one cupcake, this takes you to a user input menu. This is again a next fragment, right? It has navigated to another fragment. Now this is what you call radio group, and you have radio buttons where you can select flavor, and then you select next. You would see the cost is constant for everything. That's how they've written it. Now, when you select delivery date, you're going to see the price changing, right? So this is again a new fragment, and when you come here, this shows the order summary, and that's again in another fragment. Now, when you cancel, it goes back to the first fragment. This follows a concept called you can call it back tracing, but it's not technically called that. But what happens is it creates a stack of different fragments one over the other. So see, you'll be navigated from here to here to here. Now, when we click on cancel, what it has to do is it has to refresh everything and reset it back to what it was originally, right? Because we're canceling an order. Like we don't want any of the details to stay. So this goes and kills all the fragments and goes back to the top of the stack where we have our home fragment activity, right? So I'm going to show you what the Jetpack Navigation component offers. Before that, a few technical terms about the Jetpack Navigation component. So you have three terms that you need to know. One is your navigation host, which you call a nav host, which is technically what shows up as a fragment, right? So your fragment is, so you have an activity. On top of an activity, you have something called nav host. And inside the nav host is what is where you display your fragment, right? So that's one component. Another component is called a navigation graph, which is the coolest part of it, which I'll come. You see a nav graph .xml. So that's one thing. And the last thing would be a nav controller, or your navigation controller, which you call in your Kotlin files to navigate between the different fragments. So let me open this up a little wide. This is your navigation graph. Now you see, compared to writing code, you would of course prefer something like this, like just click and drag to where you would like it to navigate through and how you like to go back. And see on each of the navigation, you can select an enter animation, an exit animation. So they've made the experience pretty easy. All you would have to do is just, like you see here, a new destination, just pull up. Now all the activities are placed here. That's why. Otherwise, you would see activities here. You would just get them, and you would just connect them like by drawing lines between them. So they've made the entire experience pretty simple. So that's your navigation graph. Now, if you see here, you would see what I was talking about is the navigation controller, right? That helps you navigate between the different fragments. So you would see here, you find your fragment, right? And then you assign a nav controller to that. And then you set up an action bar in a sense that helps you, transit between the different fragments of your app. So again, all of this should be pretty understandable to you once you understand what the concept is. So say now you know what a nav host is, what a navigation graph is, and what a navigation controller is. And also in the previous two sessions, I think most of you will be familiar with how classes work and how your Android Studio app structure is. So you could easily, go through the code here and understand what's happening where. Now, all of this is put up in the GitHub repo link shared by, the one where Google puts up everything. I think it was shared to all of you. So again, all the code is downloadable from there, and all of this is again a part of the course that Google provides. I don't have too much time, otherwise I would have been talking in detail about this, but pretty sure none of you would have a hard time understanding. But again, you can reach out to all of us, reach out to me at any point of time via the Discord channel if you have any sorts of questions regarding anything. Right, so this is about the Jetpacks navigation component. We have, again, just to summarize real quick, the Jetpack navigation component consists of three components: a navigation graph, a nav controller, and a nav host, right? Nav host is where your fragment shows up. Navigation controller is what you use to control the navigation between different fragments, and your navigation graph is what helps you determine which fragment opens up after which one, right? That way. So that pretty much wraps up the navigation part, right? And before we reach on to architecture, I'm just going to tell you the two ways we had to navigate. One was using intents, where we navigate between different activities, and another way was using Jetpack's navigation components to navigate between different fragments, right? So those are the two ways that we'll be teaching you. Okay, now moving on to the next thing that I was talking about is Jetpack's architecture components, right? So you always want to separate your data and your UI, because the most common instance that I have is when you switch over your device from portrait to landscape, provided that you don't have a proper view group setup, you would lose out most of the data, right? I mean, they get cut off from the part of the screen. So on the surface, you would see that it's not being displayed, but what's happening behind is your entire activity or a fragment that couldn't load up properly. So all the data connected to that would have been lost, right? I mean, it would be stored in the bundle, but provided that the navigation, the switch in orientation has been um, taking place at, say, mm, I'm not able to put it in proper words, but say you switch your device orientation in a manner that your activity can't recover the bundle stored, and then the entire data gets lost. So that's again a very common problem you would see when you first start off building apps, right? So that's why what Jetpack advises, is to separate your UI as well as your data. So UI is according to what they usually, I mean, they have a specific set of terminologies, right? So according to their terminology, what you have is a UI controller, which is your activity or your fragment that displays everything with the UI is taken care of. UI controller, as the name goes. Whereas you have something called a view model. Now you again have other options. You have something called room, I believe. They are used to store data within your app, right? This data will not be lost in any kind of scenario until and unless you force shut down your app within the options, right? Except for that, in all scenarios, your data will be retained, and that's what you technically want. So again, it's advisable to follow. Advisable, I wouldn't say advisable. It is, I would say, mandatory to follow this kind of an architecture while building your app, because you don't want to have to lose user data. So we're going to be looking into the architecture components. Now you again know activity and fragments that's been covered. So what we need to look into is a view model, right? So a view model is, as I mentioned, app data that's being displayed in the views. That's where it technically reads out from the slide. So what that means is in the first app that we built, we just added strings to our strings.xml and showed them on our button as well as the text view, right? And now that's again very minimal data. But what a view model would do is a view model would have all your data stored, and you can use those data directly to be displayed onto your UI controller, which is either your activity or your fragment. You wouldn't have to go to your say activity underscore main.xml file and declare a string in your strings.xml and link that to that. No, you would just, I mean, that depends on what kind of use case you have, but on a normal basis, you wouldn't need to do that anymore because your view model stores all the data. And so say what you do for a view model is you create a class. You create a different class file altogether. Okay, it's not linked to your UI at all. You just go to your Java folder and you right click and you click on new. Let me just show that to you real quick. Okay, so if you see here, we have a model. So how you do that is you would just go here and you would click on new, and then you would create a Kotlin class file. That would just basically be a .kt file where you add a class. You also have options to create an activity in fragments from here, right? So you would create a Kotlin class file that way, and you see here this has been already done. So in the model, you would see that we've defined. They've defined a price per cupcake that you saw in the app a little while ago, and they have used our view model. So as I said, you would create a class and that would be inherited from the view model class. Inside that, you would have normal data values, right? You would your normal variables. Now live data, I would come to that right after this. Live data is again to keep your data in sync. So say the user changes something. Now view model does not allow you to reflect those changes automatically into your data set within the view model. So what mutable live data or live data generally does is it helps you sync those changes that the user performs in the UI to the value of the variable stored in your view model. So again, I would come to that right after this. So you would declare your variables in your class of your view model this way. And what you see here are different variables, right? And now if you need to access these variables in your, say, say in any of the files where you want to display them, so all you would have to do is you have to create an instance of this class, create an object of this class over there. If I take you here, you would see, okay, we haven't created an object here. What is it called? View model, right? Okay, I can't find that because I didn't make this app. But on a normal basis, what you would do is you would create an object of the view model class. And using that object, you would just refer to these properties as you do with a normal class, right? So say you name the object as obj. So you would do obj.quantity, obj.flavor, and you can use those variables everywhere in your UI, right? And then going back to the slides. So yeah, so as I was saying, so the view model helps you keep your data separately and in sync with view model, as I was just mentioning, something called live data. So live data, as you read from the slide, would be an observable data holder class. So any changes that the user makes at the end of the UI would be reflected back and would keep the changes in sync with your view model objects. And as it says, it's lifecycle aware. So any changes made in a particular UI where your live data has been included would only reflect back. It's not like you can access the data from any page where, any activity where it's not supposed to be there and just change it. So that's secure in terms of that. And I think that pretty much would wrap up the data separation from the UI. So just revising Android architecture by Jetpack is what the basic principles that they tell you to follow is tell you to separate UI and data. A UI separate is called UI controller, and UI controller would be your activity or your fragments, which you just learn how to navigate through using your navigation component given by Jetpack or via intents. Whereas on the other hand, you have your data that's supposed to be stored separately so that you don't mess it up when you say lose control of your device, and that's done via live data and view model, right? So now, okay, now we're going to come to a pretty important part. So concurrency, that term seems pretty out of point here, but it's relevant, but I'm talking in terms of seeing it for the first time. So what concurrency is, let me give you an example. Say your app connects to the internet, right? That's a pretty again important feature. We'll be coming to that right after this. So as your app connects to the internet, you would have various tasks running, right? So you might want to have to fetch images from the server. You might have to say get real-time data from say certain sensors you set up. So you might have many tasks in an app, right? Say you think of YouTube. So when you first open up the app, you need to first load the specific user profile and specific settings related to that user profile. You would also have to look up the the watch history. Based on the watch history, you would have to load suggestions for videos. That way, you would also have to specifically order them out based on what you've watched and how much time you watched it for, different algorithms for that. You would also have to say when you are on Wi-Fi, if you have that option turned on, when you just hover over a video, you would have to play that video, you have to load the buffer. There's a lot going on, right? And you can't do all of that on the surface. You can't keep doing that on top of the UI. Like you can't keep doing it in the foreground, is what I'm trying to say. Because if you keep doing it in the foreground, but the user is trying to interact with the UI, say you have too much of tasks going on, so that's going to be leading to the app not responding, right? The UI not responding. And you definitely don't want that, right? I mean, of course, you wouldn't want your app to just freeze out and load all the data and then again start running. So to prevent that, what you do is you shift certain tasks to your background. Now you just can't keep running one task in your background and give all the resources to that, because you again need your foreground to be responsive as well as multiple tasks to run in the background. So that's done using something called coroutines in Kotlin, where you run multiple threads, is what you call them. You run multiple threads which run multiple jobs in the background, and they keep your UI running, because you would generally classify threads as a main thread that runs your UI on the top, and that's always active. No other jobs given to that. Whereas you have background threads that run different background processes, right? Depends on what you assign, but then your main thread always runs the UI. So you would see here what I was just talking about. You have if you have a single path of execution, you would have task one, task two, task three following sequentially, and in that course of time, you would have your app frozen, just not doing anything. Whereas what you would want it to do is respond to your UI, and even if it's not being able to load, right? So say you don't have an internet connection and you have only a couple of videos buffered, so you would be able to scroll through them, right? If you scroll further down, it would say problem loading videos or can't load at the moment or something like that. But the UI that you still see on your screen is still pretty usable. So that's how you want it to be. Now, on a general note, say you have several tasks running in the background, right? That's what you want, multiple threads. So no two threads should ideally do the same task at the same time, right? So that's why you see the gap here. It of course shows that they run in different times. I mean, the task one starts and halfway through, not exactly halfway through, but just to give you an example, you have task two running, and then somewhere at the point of task two running, you have task three going on and task one ending. So these are called threads. They implement a feature called non-blocking I/O, which is pretty clear from the term itself. Now I'll be showing you an example of how you run a thread in Kotlin. So you would see here the definition of a thread that I just explained. And this piece of code would help you run a thread. Now you can run multiple threads using just maybe a normal loop, or you can use the repeat command if you remember. That would just help you run it a specific number of times, provided you know how many times to run it. A notable point is you can declare multiple threads in the beginning, right? And then you can only run them when you call the thread.start function. So what you would have to do is declare multiple threads, and then maybe say call a for loop where you do thread.start. Maybe, like if you name it this thread, you get what I'm trying to say, right? You would have to call them, start them out individually, separately. You can't just have them all run together while you create the threads. That's not how they work. So again, threads pretty useful. That wraps up the I would say concurrency, coroutine threads part of it. Um, so quickly revising what we just did, um, we spoke about navigation, different types of navigation, one using the Jetpack components, another using our intents. Then we moved ahead and we spoke about how you how you manage your architecture, how you split data and UI. Now I finally came to how you run tasks in the background using threads and how threads actually work. Now we're going to come to a pretty cool part of our app, which is connecting to the internet. This is again a very, I would say, vast topic because you would have to know what a HTTP server does, what's a client-server architecture, what is REST, how APIs work, what's URI. This again isn't coverable throughout the course, but I've stated what's necessary for you to connect to the internet. And before I would suggest all of you to first understand HTTP, how HTTP servers work, how a client server architecture works, and all of that separately before you start working on any app that connects to the internet. But again, through this course, I've pretty much given you what you would need to understand how they work, right? So, excuse me for a minute, please. Yeah, sorry. So most of the servers that you, web servers that you see today would be running something that you call a REST architecture, which is a representational state transfer, as you would see on the slide. So what technically happens here is you have an architecture which is stateless. So what I mean by that is, say you have multiple users running requests to this particular web server. So one with REST architecture associated with it would not be able to differentiate between the different type of requests, right? So every request made from the user would seem similar to it because it would not need any information about the client that is making a request, right? So you have something called a client and a server. A client is, say, for example, us, and we are making a request to a web server somewhere stored safely. And it's just a way of making you understand how they work. Of course, it's a little different when you try to understand it. But so what you do is you make a request to a web server in the form of an HTTP request, is what you call it. Excuse me. So you would have an HTTP request with, say, different request headers that which you would specify the data that you would be needing back from the server, and the server would receive that specific request and would reply with the response containing the data that would typically be in what you call a JSON format or XML format. Typically, JSON is used everywhere, which is called JavaScript Object Notation. So that's again in the form of, like in dictionaries, you have something called a key and a pair. Key and a value, right? Similarly, in a response, you have something called, as I mentioned, JSON, and JSON in the form of key value pairs. So I would, that's how you make requests to a web server, and the web server replies back. Use something called URIs in a REST architecture, and a RESTful web service is how they're called. And again, I wouldn't be talking too much about it because it's a little deep of a topic that you would need to get into. You would learn this in your third semester in a subject called web technologies. Pretty scary, but yeah. Okay, right. So this is again to show you what, whenever you look up something, you're making basically HTTP request to that particular web service, and that gives you a response in form of whatever, depends on what kind of a request you've made. And as I was mentioning, you have your data being responded in the form of key value pairs. So now an app that a service, I wouldn't call it a service, you can call it a set of tools, which is a library, like a library that helps you achieve this task of connecting to the internet. In Android Studio would be your Retrofit library, right? I mean, of course, have many, but we're talking of what's used all the time. So Retrofit helps you connect your web service and return back the specific data that you need it for. So if you look here, you have your view model, which if you remember is where your data is again stored. You have a view model and your live data. They interact with your retrofit library, which you include as dependencies in your Gradle file, and then you create an instance of it saying retrofit builder, and you assign a converter library, which now whose role is to say when you get back responses from the web service, your role is to convert it to the JSON objects. You convert them to strings or whatever you've asked for, right? And this is again depends on what web service you're calling out to. That's a pretty basic structure of retrofit. If you go out to the Google course, they have given you a very vast overview of how retrofit works, but this is on the surface of what it looks like. A little more information about retrofit. So what you do is, let me pull up that Android Studio file. Yeah. Okay, this one does not use. 1 second. You have what do you call a Mars Photos app. This one's the one that uses your retrofit library to load images onto your app. So if I quickly run this, and by the time I'll explain you. So you would see that we have, if you remember, I was talking yesterday that you would have to split up different parts of your app into different, say, packages or folders that would they would achieve different tasks, right? So here you have a network folder where you have your, okay, that's open. This is the file where you would see retrofit being used. So you have something called your base URL, where this is the URL where you have, you can call it a base or home site. And again, after the slash, whatever parameters you provide, whatever search queries you provide, that would be again added on to this specific base URL. This remains constant depending on what you've chosen. So you define your base URL on the top. Now again, this is the next topic. This is a library that's used to, if you remember the picture that I just showed all of you. If I quickly build, this converter library that converts the data that you get from a web service into specific format that you would need. That's the library that you see here. So that's your converter. And now you would see an instance of retrofit being created. You have a builder, which is your constructor. The constructor is typically used, the constructor that you use in classes normally. The same kind of constructor here. You have different options that you would need to provide to enable this particular retrofit library is your converter, which has been defined here, your base URL defined above, and then you build your retrofit API network. API is an application programming interface. API is something that you communicate to say, help you make your, that helps you achieve your tasks of say like here you're fetching Mars images, right? So you make a query to the API, and the API returns you with the JSON data, right? So that creates, this specific code creates your retrofit API network, and that is what I wanted to show you from this piece of code. Now, if I get back to the PPT, right, so you would see that it again has support for data formats such as XML and JSON, but typically people stick on to JSON. Again, XML is widely used, but yeah. And it has the capability to run background threads as you would, as I was talking about, right? It was a pretty important part of your app to run these tasks in the background. Now, this is the library that I was just mentioning that's used to that's a converter library, right? Part of your retrofit service, API network, which helps you convert the data that you gain back from the web service to a specific format that you would need it in. And again, all these services, as they need connection to the internet, you would have to go and enable that in your Gradle file, I believe. And that's because, as you see, the last paragraph, that connecting to the internet needs security. I mean, introduces security concerns, of course, right? So you would have to provide special permissions for that. That also, the same kind of permissions would be needed for, say, location, not any of that, right? Now, that pretty much covers the connecting to the internet part. And finally, coming on to the last topic that I'll be covering for the session today and also for understudy jams would be working with relational databases, because again, you always wouldn't be relying. I mean, you can, of course, you have your view model and your live data store your specific bits of data that you would need, but again, in apps, say something to do with an app for your organization that deals with employee records. Talk about the PESIO app, which has all your student records. So you would have to connect your database, right? So working with databases is pretty important. If you heard of SQL, Structured Query Language, that's again, I mean, you have again different types of databases that help you achieve what kind of data you're working with. I mean, organize them into proper, say, formats, but what you use here is something you call relational databases, and the best example for that would be SQL, right? If you've heard of MySQL, is what you're usually taught in school, if I remember it correctly. Uh, so that helps you. If you know MySQL, you would probably find this very, very easy. But it's pretty important to know how relational databases work. So you have something called a primary key, which you assign. Okay, so starting off from a little broader aspect, you have a database. Inside database, you have different tables. And inside a table, you have table is a typical table. So you have rows, columns. Your columns would be identifiers as to how you select data. So say I have a table for a couple of names and their roll numbers. So a roll number would be something which we call a primary key on a normal basis, because that's something that's unique, right? So you have primary key, which you have to identify unique resources, and then you have columns or different fields where you can add different data, and then when you have to filter data out, so you can be like, hey, get me the student with a roll number this. Now say you have different fields like marks, whatever. I know, pretty depressing topic I'm bringing, but yeah. So that's how structured, I mean, that's how relational databases work, right? And for using data in the form of relational databases in your app, you have again two different libraries called Room and Flow. So Room is a very, I would say not very, but it's a simplified version of what a relational database is. As you see on the screen, it uses something called object relational mapping, and that maps the tables in, say you have a relational database stored somewhere, so it maps those tables from a database and like converts them into objects so that you can use them as a part of your normal Kotlin code as you would generally use objects. And then Flow is used for returning this set, I mean, these sets of data to your UI controllers, which are again your activity and fragments, to ensure that the data that you have in your object in a part of your room library, which is again fetched from your database, and the one that you show up in your UI, they are in sync, right? So a little more about room and flow. Uh, as you would see, pretty if you know SQL, again, pretty common concepts. Tables in SQL are represented or as called as entities, and you. So the basic concept of this, I would repeat that again, is what you do is you have a database stored somewhere, and you use room to convert those database tables into objects, and then you would use those objects as you would use other objects normally in your Kotlin code. And to ensure that the object that you have in your Kotlin code and the one that you show up in your UI are in sync, you use something called flow, right? So, okay, before I go on to the tiny homework we have for all of you, um, we just name the topics that we revised today. I have 4 minutes to wrap up because we have the guest waiting. Uh, right, so the first one was about navigation and how we can implement navigation using intents, and then how using the Jetpack library. Then we had our app architecture, separate your data, separate the UI. Then we spoke about how how you deal with view model and live data, which helps you separate your data. And then finally, we went on to talking about how you connect to the internet. And also, before that, we did speak about how you run tasks in the background using the concept of coroutines. And then we spoke about connecting to the internet and how you have your retrofit library that helps you connect to the internet and get images or whatever you wish from for a web service. And finally, we stopped with how you work with relational databases. Excuse me. Yeah, sorry. How you work with relational databases, and that pretty much wraps up what we had for all of you planned in the session. Firstly, a big congratulations for having participated in Android Study Jams. I know you still see a tiny homework on your screen. So what your tiny homework is we've covered 5 sessions, 5 units from the course provided by Google. So if you look on to the site that's provided in the links which was sent yesterday, I believe, so you would see that the course has 6 units in total. And what I've covered through the course is 5. So unit 6 is what you would have to do on your own. You would have to, as you see on the screen, you have only one pathway in this unit, and you have 5 activities in that. This is about Work Manager, which is again Jetpack's take at helping you to run tasks in your background, as you read on the screen. So you would have to complete this entire unit on your own, and once you do that, you're going to be getting your certificates. So that's pretty interesting, and it's not going to take too much of time. So also, it's not that you have to do it on your own. Technically you have to do it on your own, but any doubts you might have, you can always reach out to us in the Discord channel, and we'll help you out as soon as we can. But yeah, that's the tiny homework we have for all of you, and I hope that all of you complete this so that you get your certificates. Of course, I know some of you came just for the certificates. Okay, just kidding, but right. So make sure you do that, and you'll have your certificates with you. And again, we have crosses on all our objectives, so that pretty much wraps up Android Study Jams for this year. I hope all of you had a great time learning. I know I had to rush up a little bit towards the end, but I genuinely do hope all of you learned a lot and all of you would put this learning to use in building apps. And I hope all of you have a great day ahead. Please keep rolling on your doubts, and I'll get back to them on the Discord channel later on. Thank you for listening, everybody. Had a very interesting set of days teaching all of you. Hope you had fun. Thank you. I guess you have the speaker session now, so I'll be signing off. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Manav. And I think we'll be moving on to the speaker session now. So, firstly, hello everybody. I'm Kulaji Thapar. I'm the current GDSC lead for PS University Electronic City campus. And I hope you had fun the last 3 days attending these three sessions. So, now what we have for you is a more industry view of Android development. So, to give you a better idea about what it is to become an Android developer and how the industry actually works, we have a very special speaker today. So, our guest speaker today is Anubhav Maji. He is the Director of Technology and the founding member of EMA at Parallel Reality UK. He has a lot of industry experience and with his worldview, you're surely to leave this session with more than your fair share of takeaways. So this is going to be a completely interactive session. So feel free to drop any questions you have in the comments and we will be answering them. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Anubhav Maji.
Hi, hello everyone. I am Anubhav. I am a 2020 graduate from PESIT BSc, also known as your PESIU ECC. So, yeah, to briefly describe how this industrial app development works is that, it is just not uh, constrained to, making a page, making a display, something like that. Okay. Uh, so it starts from right how you plan the architecture, whom you want to serve, the audience, the space, and how you should present your data to the audience, and also, like, there are different aspects which are to be taken care while going into the app development industry. So some of which it's they are all taught in a broken manner in college. They are all taught, everything is taught in college in a broken manner, but we just have to learn uh, to connect them together and apply it into industry. Of course, there will be some things that are entirely new in the industry, because you can't literally get an access while you are in the non-industry space, right? Or, if you are learning on your own, or in your college, you can't get access to them. So yeah, I think that can be a starting point to, your questions, or what in specific you want to know about your, app development industry as a whole. uh, if I can get some questions from you guys, it will be great. But moving on to the sessions, like, let's say I have to develop a simple to do app. Like, it's a very basic example of any Android development course or anything. So let's say I have to develop a to do app. Generally what we do is we make an activity, we make a internal database, or use other frameworks like Firebase, and everything is there. So we sort out everything, right? But on industry, we have to think about the scalability factor. Also, we have to think about how many users are going to use this. So that means you have to choose a backend, the database or the computational system, so that it is scalable to virtually unlimited amount of users, right? Sorry. So there it comes that, what are the technologies out there, and how do you actually choose a particular database, either it's a SQL, no SQL, or a different type of file structure database. That you have to figure out, and to figure out you have to actually know. So everything is taught in the college. So that what I can remember from my studies is that in the third year we had topic of how the file structure is, you know how database works. On the second year, how file system works, uh, on the third year, and in the final year, I think there was a great session on the big data map reduce, Hadoop, and also Google Cloud Structure, right? So those are all broken concepts if you have seen, but they all gather together and make something up that is very useful in the app development industry. So not only going to the back end, if you go to the front end also, you will know that front end means the client side, the app side. What is the best scalable way to present your data, and or how the data flows inside the app. So if you see that there are, let's say virtually speaking, um, there are about 1 million to do entries in a accounts app in an account, right? So the user wants to sort those to do on the basis of, on the basis of date, or on the basis of how frequently he has opened it. So you really have to know how to actually sort them. Do you want to sort it on the client side, on the app side, or on, make a query to the backend and get the sorted result, right? And also it's like you have to know the algorithms, you have to know what all the sorting mechanisms, algorithms, the the constraints that you are uh, you want to take consideration while developing the system. So I got few questions here. So how to go zero to hero in app development? Yeah, so it every time it's the same. For anything, you learn from the basics and you go to the advanced level. So one thing I would specifically ask is, if you are learning, while learning, always try to learn the best from any source, like be it you are searching an answer in the public forum, like Stack Overflow. See how the mistakes, what are the mistakes they are pointing out, read each and every comments, see the other answers other than the accepted answer, also see the coding style they do. Okay, what mechanisms they use, like uh, previously, for uh, accessing internet, before the library called as Retrofit came into picture, the people used async background tasks and all that. So now the Retrofit came. It is a very helpful thing. Some comments may suggest that if you are doing it using async background task, then why not move to a Retrofit? It handles everything for you, right? It's a very good tool. uh, Next thing is, always strive for the best, best practice. So from the coding, from the starting, when you learn basic coding, not Android development, but the language itself, either Java or Kotlin. Okay, learn the basics. So basics in detail, like let's say you have concepts of object oriented programming, you have concepts of class, inheritance, um, you got polymorphisms, and all those concepts you have to apply it. It's just not, how we learned coding in school, in college, is that we got a objective, we are given certain inputs and we want to get some outputs out of it. So that's a that's a good model, but that's not applicable for a whole app. Okay, that's a bigger picture. That's a very constant space, but we have to think about the bigger picture. If you are making a program on a or a whole file, like let's say I want to create an to do app, I write the to do app, I click on next. So now I have to validate the to do app, the to do text box, that it's not blank, it has to have certain number of characters or something. Okay, next you save it to the database. There can be many more processes outside of that. So all these process, they can be grouped into functions like small sub fragments. So these are some of the best practices that you can try to follow from the language level. Okay, next thing is, when you come to the Android development level, you can go for you know practicing the latest practices that is recommended by Google, like using their Jetpack packages, and using all the latest frameworks or the modules they are giving, like rooms, You got the web manager, sorry, work manager, and also the different types of view models, and all those stuff. So you have to use all those while from the beginning itself. It may be very intimidating at first, seeing all those topics flying around, and you can't grasp around all those, but it really becomes comfortable when you go ahead. uh, All right. Learning Kotlin is better or Java for beginners? This is a fairly debatable topic, but in my personal opinion, I think if you are going on a simple app and learning the concepts, and not really using very critical libraries or third party things, then you can easily go for Kotlin. There is fair amount of support from Google. uh, the community is still growing, the support community is still growing, but it's I think it's the best way to go about. But if you are again using some critical libraries, like let's say OpenCV, and then using some TensorFlow libraries and all those, you probably have to go for Java, which is favored in the okay. That's the which is favored in the industry. Currently, I would say new apps which are coming, they are mostly switching to cross-platform frameworks rather than native, the new ones. But if some things are very complex, like let's say you have a banking app, and you want to have all those things, so those, it actually depends on how the workforce is. So if I have like 10 set of engineers who are expert in Java, then I won't spend much more money to hire 10 more guys for Kotlin, and then get a Kotlin app ready. So I would go for choosing the Java itself, but because they are already knowing the ecosystem, the coding ecosystem there. What is preferred at industry level, Kotlin or Flutter, React Native? Um, Industry level, so it depends. It depends on the scale of industry, the the workforce you have. Let's say I have a person who is equally flexible for Flutter app development with native Java or Kotlin. Then I will switch to my use case, the audience level. So I will see, if I need a web platform, do I need a web based interface, or do I need uh, faster deployment? Like let's say the app is not very complex, it's just CRUD operations, get something, put something, update something, delete something, and all those things. Then it is favored that cross platform is a better one, because I don't have workforce for native iOS developers. I don't have time to go for development on individual platforms and deploy it. So it is much more preferred that uh, cross platform frameworks are used. But if you don't have the workforce to support all those, then obviously you have to go for uh, the native developers, native app development frameworks. The app space changes very rapidly. How tough is it to keep up with the latest market trends once you get in the industry? That's a very good question. So that's why you have one thing to keep about in the app development flow, is that one thing I mentioned is about scale. Next thing is flexibility. So you have to take care of this flexibility as and when requirement comes. Requirement, be it functional requirement, non-functional requirement, doesn't matter. uh, as soon as the requirement comes, you have to make your changes very frequently, like rapidly, and then deploy it. So now deployment again goes through certain stages. You go for creating the app, and then go for testing it, automated or manual testings, and next thing is go for seamless deployment. So first, Google Play Console or Play Store has provisions to uh, you know confine the deployment into a particular segment, like let's say 10%, 20%, and after that, if you are happy with those numbers, that that version of your app is not getting buggy, or it's not giving wrong feedbacks, or undesirable feedbacks, then you can roll out to the 100% of the customers. I hope I did understand that question correctly. The app space changes very rapidly. So, are you asking about the, any particular app, or are you talking about the technology that is involved in it? Like, you start with Java, and then after that you switch to, Flutter, and then you have to see that, no, I'm not comfortable with Flutter, I have to change it to something. Is that if you are asking that, it also depends on how the requirement is, the audience is. If you need a web-based platform alongside the app, it's more desirable to go for cross-platform frameworks. Is it worth learning Kotlin when we have stuff like Flutter? Now, what I have seen with Flutter is that it doesn't have UI on its own like we have it in you know Android Studio natively. So what it focuses on is that you make your UI, and most of the developers tend to be on that sequential programming paradigm. So it's like, uh, when you are focused on an objective, that I click on something and something should happen. So if I click on save, my to do entry should have saved. I click on it, and every code will be on that on click on tap function callback, right? If you have Flutter, so it gets a little bit uh, clumsy in there. It tends to do, but if you can do it, modularize each of them, make every functions independent, then it is actually worth learning Flutter, because they have the same object oriented concepts. If you can grasp the concepts, that's all that matters. Doesn't matter if you do it in Kotlin, Java, or Flutter. Okay, they also have classes, they also have inheritance, they also have polymorphism. Everything is almost the same. uh, in the app development space to be focused on, it like I said, it also depends on the workforce that you have, the requirements that you have. What's the average salary to be expected for a fresher in Android development field? What should we do to get promoted fast? What's the average salary to be expected, like for a fresher in Android development field? I mean, that can vary. I have heard some of my friends go for tier one. I have also go for, seen some of them have gone for the tier one plus. So it's a pretty decent field. Actually, frankly speaking, it's a very rapidly growing field. You won't have, uh, you know, a stage that it will decline someday. Okay, because devices are getting smaller, apps are very, becoming much popular rather than a web interface or anything. So even apps are now using, PWA, that is progressive web apps, to, make their website more accessible to smaller devices, more portable. Okay, now, Windows also is shifting to phone OS systems, though it's not, very useful right now, but yeah. So it's a very rapidly growing space, and you can expect a good result out of it. And what should we do to get promoted fast? Now, to get promoted fast, just focusing on this app development sector itself, right? So just be up to date. Okay, up to date means you will have new technologies coming on. If you spend some time of your, of your total time, that, I should actually catch up onto the technologies, the latest day technologies. I should, learn the concepts fast, and I should be dynamic in the sense, if I know Java, or native Android programming, I should not be confined to that. I should be easily switching to Flutter or cross-platform, or even so to say iOS development. Okay, that's the app development industry as a whole. So it's all about the flexibility that you have, how good you can switch to different platforms and different technologies. That's all that matters. And how efficiently you can do stuff. So let's say you are doing something, you are making a app, and then you don't do testing on it. So it's a pretty big drawback. Either manual or automated testing, you have to do testing before doing anything else moving forward. Are there any ML libraries that can be used with Kotlin? There are good libraries. They have good Kotlin support, but to be specific, I can't as of now, I can't name anything. But they have Google ML Kit, you have Firebase machine learning kit, right? uh, Kotlin also, sorry, TensorFlow also has Kotlin support. So once TensorFlow, then I think that's one stop, right? You just have to get the model or build the model and use it up. So yeah, what should I learn to actually implement ML in app development, because I love both of these, right? So this ML with app development. Now you have to think that app development is a sorry ML machine learning is a pretty extensive or resource demanding uh, you know resource demanding thing. So that means you are very constrained to certain devices that has the capability of running the ML models in them. What you actually desire to do, like let's say you are running a computer vision model in a phone. That means you have to take care of the fact that your phone is capturing the frame and then passing on to the ML model, and after that it is getting the ML results, and after that giving the user a feedback. Giving user a feedback in industry level app development is just not showing the text or whatever, but it is actually presenting intuitively so that user actually loves the app. Okay, he finds interest to come back to the app and uh, you know use it more often. So that's the part where we got features like GPU acceleration, hardware acceleration to be specific. If you know how to actually connect your ML models or ML engine to your phone GPU, it is much more faster. So that means you have to dig into a bit of a concept, bit of a deeper concept, while uh, going into the ML plus app development stuff. Also, it can vary. It doesn't mean that if you are just doing a Google Lens kind of thing, right? Let's say for example, if you are using app, if you're making an app that I click a snapshot of my laptop, and then it should say that it's a laptop object detection model. So it will be pretty simple because you only have one frame to be processed. You don't need live detection, live feedback giving. Right. So I hope that actually gives some insight as to how to go forward. First of all, I should say that first of all, learn the basics. Learn the basics of programming, the object-oriented concepts, and then move on to basics of app development, how to use the architecture, the back, the whole of model, view models, the the services are very important. Services, the background tasks, and connecting to the internet, those should be from your side before going to ML. I think those should be actually flawless from your side if you are developing such things. So It is also a very in demand field, ML plus app development, because machine learning, it has gained a lot of focus in recent times. And like I said, the devices are getting smaller, so apps. Yep, I think that sums up it. Hmm. What should you wish you knew when you started Android development? Yeah, so not I wish I knew. There are many things I wish I think I still don't know, but uh, there were this Google I/O, I think 2019 or 18, they introduced this whole Jetpack library, which has rooms, concept of view models, content, all these stuff. So they are so they are so flexible and so easy to maintain, that they make your app 10 times faster just by implementing them, just not confining it to the native Android app development, right? So I think that those technologies, if I had at that time, I shouldn't be reiterating my knowledge so much as I'm doing now. How important are projects? If they are, then what kind of projects carry more weight? Uh, for learning app development, obviously, uh, projects are very important. Personally, I feel like I have learned app development and all these things, concepts, so to speak, programming concepts and app development all together via projects itself. Okay, my first project was industry level e-commerce app. I was in second year that time. uh, it was an internship, but I was the only developer. So so yeah, it gave me a pretty big clarity about how to present data, what are the challenges that the users face, um, while they are using the app. How intuitive should it be? It should be feature packed, or it should be customer first. So there are two concepts in projects and in products. So in projects, we follow feature first, but in products we follow customer first. So in projects is that we try to implement as many features as we want, because we are learning at that time. We want to, what do you say, uh, we want to impress someone, the audience that we are seeing. But in products, it's the making our app impressive and making it feature packed is not the goal. The goal is to make it spread across different, more and more users, and make them retain it, make them use it continuously. So it should not be like I use it, after one day I delete it. No, that is not the goal here. So that's how your project should be focused on. So your projects could be a real life project also. Like, let's say, it depends on how you want to go forward. If you want to learn some industry level, or not industry level, but real life, you know concepts, like let's say you have a game, you have a certain game, like let's say you are developing Uno is a card game. So if you are developing it, it can be developed in native Android without the use of game development frameworks also. Okay, so if you are using such kind of that means you have to, you will learn the concept of concurrencies. Concurrency means, like let's say you and me are playing a card game. I take certain cards. Now, at the same time, you should not be getting the same cards, because those cards are unique. If I get those cards, you cannot get those cards. That means I have a concept of resource locking and concurrency. Like, uh, when I am choosing those resources, the demanded resources are to be locked for you. Uh, so these are some of the concepts that you can go around. Now, let's say you are going for um, a project, app development along with IoT. IoT is Internet of Things. Uh, primarily specifies on turning everything into your internet ecosystem, right? If I want my door to be opened automatically with a tap of a button on your app, then I should be very cautious about how much data I transfer to the small microchip or controller, whatever is there, right? Arduino or Raspberry Pi. So what happens is they are very constrained. They have few MBs of memory, few MBs of RAM, few MBs of cache memories, right? So you can't send it like big paragraphs of data or big chunks of data into it. It cannot handle that. Okay. And it can, so those kind of concepts you learn by different type of projects. If you want to learn more of a UI kind of project, then you can go for such intuitive intensive or intuitive projects, like you have animations floating around. So animation is a pretty tough task to do until the motion layout came in Android Studio. I think it was Android Studio 4. The motion layout came, and it made the work of animation and page transitions a whole lot easier. If you see YouTube, so if you see YouTube, you can see there are a lot of animations and lots of things going on. Yes. So what kind of projects carry more weight? So it's basically real life projects, I think. If you build something of which solves a real life, be it your own personal problem, but that carries much more bigger worth than you just click on something and something happens. So yeah, developing games are for deeper concepts, but probably not of much use. If someone finds it useful, like if someone understands that this game has a lot of deeper concepts, it will be carrying more weight. But otherwise, it only has your own personal improvement there. What should an intermediate developer do further develop their skills? Doing more courses or doing internships or any other options, right? If you are intermediate developer, so first thing is, don't stop. Okay. Try learning different things. Like, if you are intermediate developer, that means you are pretty matured to, or pretty mature to know that by seeing any app, how things are flowing. Is it an activity? Is it a fragment? Is it a tile button? Is it a list? Is it animating? Is it in a single activity itself with different fragments just flowing around? So if you are intermediate, you will be able to judge those. So try to actually think of those concepts and try to get more ideas as to how to make the app flow or app navigation much more simpler and much more intuitive and smooth. So anything like, let's say, everything can be put into different pages, but all those pages also have different drawbacks, flaws. So let's say, you can't have, just for example, for intermediate developers in the audience, I'm saying, let's say, you have a side nav bar or a bottom nav bar. You can't do, page switchings on those three buttons, or, the list of items in there. You have to go for fragments. It has to be done on a single activity, right? So for to say the recycler views and all those things. So try to see the app, see different apps, and try to know how they work. Okay, what are the layouts, how things are working. On tap of a button, observe what is happening. Okay, things are loading. What are the changes? What was the state of your app before? Like, you did not have some name fields or something, now it has those things. So these things are very important. uh, Further knowing what I can learn and what to do. So more you see different innovative things, more you will start to wonder, if I can do this, if you can do this now there is a necessity, right, to to be able to achieve that now. when there is necessity, you will automatically learn. Doing more courses or doing more internships or any other option. So I feel like it's a human nature that uh, people works better on pressure. So doing more courses generally tend to go on the audiences or the users pace. You can see course, you can follow through the course, but you may not actually grasp everything. But doing internship, that's a huge pressure on you. You have to answer to someone for your wrongdoings, for your mistakes. So that's a huge pressure, and you are bound to see what concepts you have learned. Even though you have learned some things, if you are not 100% confident when you are applying that, uh, you won't feel that you should be doing that. Then you will go back again, read that concept again deeply, be confident, and then come back to your application. So I think internships is a very good option for developing much more skills, because you get to get the exposure of the industry level tech and the demands, the necessities out there. And any other options, like if you are pretty determined to learn, apply those gold level concepts, then you can go for developing your personal apps, but using all those, everything keeping in mind scalability, flexibility, robustness, and you know resilience. So everything has to be kept in mind. Only then you can grow. Like, it won't be perfect at first time. If you think, you will feel like, okay, there is something that's not right. Okay, try to see what other people are doing. Go on medium blogs and other tutorials. Like, notice everything. So if you are going on a Stack Overflow thing, you can see the syntax has changed. Sometimes even I see that a particular statement is written in some way that even I didn't know that it could be written that way. Okay, that's that's a that's a better learning. Be it that probably was the mistake, the questions code, or the not accepted code, but that had a valid uh, knowledge that I can apply later. So if I had to choose between iOS and Android development, which would be the better choice? uh, Statistically speaking, uh, the continent wise, Asia, Southeast Asia, the Eastern Asia, even on most of the parts of Russia and all, they all have very much of a Android affinity rather than iOS. But again, on the Western side, it's more prevalent. The iOS is much more prevalent. So, so if you for your personal learning, I would say that go for what is much more accessible to you. Like, let's say, uh, if you are taught Java at your in your college, if you are taught Kotlin in your courses on some things, if you are taught Android development, then go for Android development first. Get the concepts, uh, get that there is navigations to be followed, get that there is this algorithms, and there are much more scale. All these factors like scalability, robustness, resilience, and flexibility is there in your Android development skills, and then you can apply easily to those, to iOS development. uh, so it's only a matter of language and how the programming style is. Not much of a different with regards to the concept. Yeah, can I make games using Kotlin? Yes, of course. I mean, using Kotlin, the games, it will depend actually. I made some Uno card game and another Lego kind of game, Tetris kind of game. Sorry, Tetris kind of game using just Android. Doesn't matter the language. I used Java because Kotlin was not there at that time, but Kotlin also can be used easily. You Now there are bigger libraries like OpenGL and uh, you know s- concepts. The frameworks like those allow you to go for much more deeper 3D games kind of environment. But I don't feel like Android is suitable for those. We get to see Unity and Unreal engines that are focused on those part of games, 3D games, concurrencies, live, uh, so all those stuff are very much focused by Unreal and Unity engine. Now let's say in Android, in Unity, for example, you will have two things: start and a loop, right? So if you go, sorry, start and update. Now update function calls every frame. Now every frame. Imagine nowadays PCs run on 120 FPS, 140 FPS. That means the piece of code that you are writing into that function, that will be called 140 times per second. Think about how fast your calculations or the code has to be if you don't want your game to lag, right? So those kind of concepts are very very demanded in the game development sector. It is much more difficult to do game development. Personally, I feel that it is much more difficult to do game development than Android and iOS development, like app development as a whole. What are the challenges you still face while being an Android app developer? It's mostly about how to plan the architecture. It's mostly about how to plan the architecture such that it is scalable and flexible. So let's say I build using every possible gold standards, then that makes my app robust. It can handle any kind of error, any kind of flaws. My server is not returning data, that's fine, I can handle it. Okay. But if you have not structured your data, it can lead to slower responses. It can lead to, you know, uh, you have to make unnecessary codes just to get some data. Like let's say, uh, I have my, or let's say for Amazon, right? I have my order. I want to see all the orders and all the cards through which those orders, each individual cards were made. If I store the card details along with the order entity, then it will be much more easier. I just query for all the orders, I get the card details even. But if I don't, I have to query the customer who made the order and then the card linked to the customer. Who are these? Now let's say there are 1 million orders and I have to do these three steps for each 1 million of them. It's a very big task and it will be very slow. So that's one of the challenge. Second thing is flexibility. Now flexibility is how fast you can add or remove or update features in your app without disturbing the existing customers out there in the market. So let's say this is a very simple example. Let's say there is an app which asks you for your full name and your email address. So okay, initial version 1, you have a you know app name, your full name and your email address, you enter, you go next, fine. Now a version update comes. Now the server in the backend has changed. It needs your age as well. Okay. Now there has to be, the app should have a you know mechanism to detect that the backend server or database does not have this user's age information. So I have to ask for it by using means of pop-up or a separate page or whatever. Anyways, that information has to be gathered. Unless you give it, you can't go proceed with the app. So that is a very backward compatible method about how to make your app flexible. Like let's say sometimes it matters, sometimes it does not matter. Like for example, if I say age, it is mandatory that if you put the age, the user has to give the age. um, but let's say there is another field, um, that is, how many times have you gone outside of your house this week? Just a simple metric. Okay, how many times have you gone out of the house this week? So uh, this is a metric that even the value, default value of 0 has a meaning. 0 means you haven't gone out, but if you can't put 0 for age, person cannot have 0 as age, right? So it matters, it depends on how what is the data and the value of it, and how important it is to have some value in it. So you have to make your app resilient enough so that it can detect that some missing information is there. I have to make this user give me those informations and make my database or the backend very consistent. Okay, so that my every other systems go flawlessly. That's one of those are the two main things that I face. Otherwise there are a lot of things that can be listed, and it can be going on. uh, Scope of app dev as a freelancer. Scope of app dev as a freelancer, that's a very good question. So what happens is that now there are many companies who are budding. Okay, they are startups. They need app development people. Like, they have ideas, but they don't know how to implement it, right? So they don't know how to implement it, so that's why they go for freelancing. And I need a app, i need to I need it to have these features, and this is all it is. So there is a growing industry in this. Okay, it's a very good scope for app development as a freelancer, I feel. How can concepts of big data concepts can be used in app development? Well, big data, to my knowledge, uh, big data is primarily on the server or the backend side. You maintain all those, churn the data, like you derive information out of it. You take data, you derive information out of it, and only the information is presented on the app side. Okay, so mostly in the industry level, the like I said in the first, that app development is not just confined to only app development. It is related to, it starts from who the audience is, what are the features of the app. Now, how do you want to present it, how much feature the users want? That's a very difficult question, because you haven't got any feedback yet, right? So how much feature the users want, and if there is any similar app in the market currently, what are the features that you are, what is the unique selling point of your app, okay, compared to that are already existing in the market. Next thing is how intuitive it is, how beautifully looking it is. Okay, that depends on the audience. If you have a very young audience, then it can be very techie kind of thing. It can be very uh, updated or trendy, I should say. And if you have much more middle aged audience, right, you must have simple things, 1 2 3 step go, something done. And if you have even more senior citizens or senior audiences, then that means you have to have um, this you have to have the knowledge of, how do what are the ailments or what are the difficulties the all those age group feel, all those age group faces, and then solve those problems. Like, let's say they may be poor in eyesight. That means you have to make those elements more accessible. By accessible, I just don't mean that it should be bigger, the text should be bigger. No, it should be accessible by the phone. Some people uses the voice talk back, I think it's the feature name, smart voiceover, I think, something like that. It uses those features, and your app should say that, okay, there is this pay now button. Now if you click on this, you will be going onto your payment. If you need assistance, go to someone else. Okay, your app has to be accessible enough. um, I lost the comment. Yeah. Also, why do most companies take competitive coding kind of tests for an app developer role? That's okay. It depends on companies. Like one of the companies I sat, they on the first round they questioned about purely like real life sort of app development. So they gave me a list of uh, email IDs and server logs to be specific, and then they told me you can use any language. They even gave me the whole help book of all the languages of every possible functions, keywords, data types, everything. They have given the help book, but no internet. They say that you can use any language, take help from the help book if you need it, but you have to fulfill, solve these 5 questions. It was like, find all the emails with certain things, find all the emails that email records that were not sent or bounced back. Okay, all those things, those were those I feel, in my personal opinion, they are very interesting and they are very much applicable to the app development field. uh, Not only that, it can be very much applicable to the DevOps field also, because you need to go through long list of server logs and see what is the uh, what's the actual root cause of your error or the bug that was caused, right? So it's I aced that round, but again, from for the second one, they started asking about algorithms and the competitive codings. Now I thought, what could be the reason? The reason is nothing but, they want to see, first of all, they want to see, or not they want to see, I should say, me as employer, I would like to see that how fast the candidate is grasping the knowledge. So if I give some instructions, how fast they can understand the question or the pattern. Okay, if I give some question like 1257, something like this, so how fast they can understand the pattern, that's a very good quality for a candidate. Next thing is, he should know the concepts. I mean, you don't have to actually uh, you know what a quick sort, how to write a quick sort, right? But you should know that there is a sorting algorithm known as quick sort, and it is faster than linear sort. All those sorting algorithms and any many more algorithms that are there. So you have to be just cautious about, these are the options that I have. I probably won't know or won't remember when I go to the company or when I join the company about all these stuff in detail. I can take help. I can, the internet is always there, but I should know that there is an option like this. Okay. That's why I think most companies, or even to say, I would see what is the look forward in a candidate. Also, sometimes I once faced one this. So there is this question called as bitonic array. So there is this bitonic array means, you have at a certain point of array index in the array, you have increasing order, and after that index you have decreasing order of the array. So you have to find a certain element inside that kind of an array. So what will you use? So I think what I answered to one of answer to this question long back was that, okay, it's a binary search kind of thing. So you first decide what's the, if it's already sorted, first you find the midpoint, I mean the largest value, and after that then you search for the element. Now searching for an element, it would be pretty easy because you only have one side to search. Okay, so if you know what's the largest value, then sorry, you only have have two sides to search separately. Okay, but you will have, to search one side and the other side in the reverse order. Something, the question was something like this. I applied some maths onto it, simple maths, like let's say comparing two elements. If you have to sort it, like, like 2 comes before 3. So if I want it to be arranged ascending in ascending order, I will say, okay, if 2 comes before 3, then pass out 3. So if I comes before j, then first print out I, then j. But if I wanted to, reverse it, then I can just pass a parameter that there is a modifier, factor modifier, probably something -1. So if I just multiply these I and j to -1, that becomes -2 and -3. Now -3 comes before -2 in the number line, right? So now if those are compared, then I can just return I and j in the reverse order, j and I, because j is minus with the j is smaller than minus with the I. So these kind of mathematical, basic mathematical, uh, concepts, if you remember and can apply those, that will be very much appreciated by the, I think, the interviewer. Also, they have their own personal, requirements. Their company requires these coding questions to be solved. Those, there are different types of reasons, but personally I feel that's what I would look for. College should teach after. Okay, okay, thanks. So I hope I answered most of the questions here. Um, One thing is that there are many apps which actually surprises us. Like let's say there is this Shazam app, right? If you know Shazam app, that's a app which can tell you the name of the music or give the details of the music that's playing. Uh, when, if you just play a music before your phone, how does it search? It's a very good concept, going deeper into mathematics and then applying your regular mathematic courses like Fourier and Laplace transformations and all those concepts. These can be very easily implied, or they can be very useful in such type of applications, right? So you don't, so it can find out even humming of your voice. If you just hum, it can, yeah, okay, it can just, search out. So so yeah, thanks for correcting. It's I think 4 year. Yep. Yeah, it is pretty interesting stuff, I think. Any more questions do you have, guys? I don't think,
Right.
probably.
So I think we're done with the questions.
Right,
So
right.
we'd really
Anything in
like to thank you
specific?
first.
Anything in
Yeah. So
specific else you want to know, or you know
So
like
I
I'm
think you've
asking in
answered
general?
everything in pretty detail today. I think almost everyone's pretty happy with all the answers that you've given. So firstly, we'd like to thank you for coming here and giving us all these answers and answering everybody's doubts so perfectly.
Thanks
And
to you all to have me here. Okay, it was a great session. I feel it was my pleasure to be here and to share my knowledge to all of you. Thanks for having me here.
right. Thank you so much. Right. So before we end with this session, just like to clear some things. So first thing is you will have the homework that Manap spoke about. So we'll be sending you a proper mail with all the details for that. So you're gonna have to do the sixth course on your own. So we'll be sending you a mail for the link for the sixth course. Second thing is Manap spoke about giving you a whole list of all the links that he used when he was searching up and doing the Android course. So we'll be giving you those links as well. So that will be sent to you by mail as well. So you can do what you can do is this course is available on our YouTube now. It's created as a playlist. So if you want to come back here and look at those, you can always rewatch any of these videos. And the same course that you will be able to see online for the sixth, you will have the same first five courses that Manav taught as well. So if you do not understand something that we taught here, you can always go and look at it in the course. And one special thing is, if you finish the course, you're going to get special badges. So when we ask you to submit to us the proof that you've done the 6th course, you're going to have to submit the badge, and you're going to have to submit a link for your profile. Only after you do this will you get a certificate for completion. That is an authentic GDSE certificate that is going to say that you finished the basics of Android course. So that's it from us. I really hope you enjoyed this time's Android Study Jams and you got to learn something new. So until next year, this is goodbye from GDSC PS University. Bye-bye.